afternoon. I am Dr. Lee, the Director of Curriculum, Instruction, and Assessment, and I would like to welcome you to our Teacher Impact Conversations for grades 3 through 5, but if you're representing any other grades, we thank you for being here. We also want to thank you for extending your professional workday to be a part of this conversation. So the whole purpose for this evening session will be to talk about impact and the impact that our instructional decisions as well as our instructional approaches make on student learning. I think it is important to note that these conversations are occurring with more than just our teachers. So our leaders, our community members, our faith-based community, our business, because we all have ownership in it, correct? It's just that as teachers, we spend more time with the students. So our instructional decision making is really critical. So I would like to share the overall purpose statements with you. We're going to start with our superintendent talking about the desired outcomes for our students when they graduate from our schools, as well as to discuss current achievement level data for our students in elementary, middle, and high school. And then finally, we will discuss the instructional practices that have a greater impact on student learning, and then you'll walk away with a way to calculate your impact. Dr. Beasley will walk you through that. So at this time, I would like to call up our illustrious superintendent, Dr. Beasley. Let's welcome him.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. Hello, everybody. Good to see all y'all 1,000 people out there. Thank you all for being here. Hopefully you had a good day. Not too hectic of a day. Kids did okay today? All right, good. Well, it's hard to believe it's the 4th week of school, isn't it? So we'll be having a nice holiday weekend this weekend, and then we'll come back and do the month of September, and it just continues to fly by quickly. So thank you again for being here. So Dr. Lee has shared the purpose of today's session, and thank you for making time to come. And we are going to try to find a way to reward the schools that had the most people, teachers in attendance. And even if that's just a pizza party, even though pizza is not all that healthy. But hopefully you've seen this by now, the vision statement. You should have seen this when you returned, strategic plan. We sent a blast out to everyone if you were involved in the process. No matter where you were in the process, you should know by now that our vision is basically to be a high-performing school district where all of our students, all of them, live and compete successfully in our society. Our mission is clear. That's what we're working on every day. And that's to empower our students to achieve their personal and academic goals. We know that there are many actions that must take place on a day-to-day basis in order for us to achieve that vision, in order for us to do our mission as we do every day. Clearly, you all, reflective of the 3,000 plus teachers in the school system, you're critical to us achieving that vision and that mission, that day-to-day work of working with our students. And so we just want to make sure that we remind everyone of that vision and that mission on today. We've also identified our core beliefs. There are not many beliefs, but if you've read them, and hopefully you have, they're all focused on our children. And if there's anything that we in our school system want to do, that is to make sure that all of our decisions are about our children and fundamentally right and good for our children. And so you'll see that the first one speaks to the children having the priority for all of our resources. That number 2, that education is a shared responsibility. That includes what we do in the school system, but it also includes the community and the families as well. And so you'll see in a lot of our communication efforts, we try to keep the families and the community informed, but we also give them things that we need them to work on while we're trying to do what we need to do in the classroom. Number 3, communication and an understanding among all stakeholders. And you'll see we try to be very clear in our communication, consistent in our communication, and we try to make sure that parents are informed on all the various platforms. I'm pleased to say that I'm not getting, or I've not gotten complaints of people saying that they're not informed. If they're not informed, that's probably because we don't have your email address, which you should fix, right? Or if you have your email address, you're not checking your what? Emails, which you should what? Fix. Or you're checking your emails and you're probably deleting the ones that we're sending to you, which you should what? Fix as well. Before you should read them at least before you what? Delete them. If you're not connected to us in email, you can go to the social media platforms, because we're trying to make sure. And I often say, if we don't have your email address and you're not on the social media platforms, if you have a child in this district, should you not be checking grades? All the announcements are posted in Infinite Campus. So a parent has no excuse not to what? Not to know, on all platforms. The fourth one is we believe that learning is a continuous process, and we know that as educators. All of us who've been in the classroom, those of us who are still in the classroom, know that no matter where we stopped yesterday, today we began a new day, don't we? We benefit hopefully from what they learned yesterday. We build on what they learned yesterday or last school year, but it is a continuous process. And lastly, we want to create a learning environment where everyone has a sense of security, that they feel dignity, they feel like someone cares, and where they're respected. And I'll just sum it up like this. We want an environment where everyone feels like someone special, or you're treated at least the way you treat others, the way you want to be what? Treated. Our goals are very clear, and we have 5 of them. So the board was very clear, and when these goals were approved, and our work you'll see is to achieve these goals, to increase academic achievement. We all know why we're here. We need our students to perform at higher levels. We need them to grow academically. We need them to learn how to read and write and do math and science and do all of those things. We need them to be ready for careers and post-secondary options. But we want to also make sure that we do it within a safe and orderly environment. And so a lot of our actions are to ensure that our schools are organized, every classroom is organized, has an effective teacher in every classroom, an effective principal in every school, and that we in the central office, that we're supporting the schools to that end. To that end, we exist outside of the classroom to support our teachers who are in the classroom. Number 3, we want to create an environment that promotes active engagement, communication, etc. And that's what we're really trying to do, create that culture, that environment where everybody's informed, they're engaged, they're involved, they're participating in the work, and they have a voice at the table. Number 4, we want to provide high-quality support services within budget, clearly, timely and within budget, because we want to always be respectful of the tax dollars that we are providing. And we want to always ensure that we're spending those dollars in the manner in which they should be spent. We're going to always be accountable. We're going to always, if you come to the board meetings, you'll see that we provide budget reports every month. We show where we are fiscally. As you know, we had to cut some things last year in order to have a balanced budget. A little pains, of course, in those areas, but we try to do it in such a way that it removed a minimal amount of resources away from our students. But we had to make sure we had a balanced budget. And over time, we believe we've got a pretty solid budget now. If we can continue to keep our expenditures at bay and continue to increase our revenue over time, we'll see an increase in savings. And just so you'll know, somebody said, well, when do you start doing the extra things when you start saving? When we can get about $60 million in the fund balance, that's about 15% of your expenditures. So when we can save about $60 million, anything above $60 million is money we can play with. Does that make sense? And so we're getting there. We're getting close. Even with some decisions we had to make last year with the funds we had last year, we've increased the fund balance. But once we get to 60, then anything above 60 we can use for pay raises, we can use for additional things. But by law, they want you to keep between 10 to 15% in your fund balance, and we've got to get there. The next thing, we want to make sure that we recruit, develop, and retain highly qualified and effective staff. And that would be in all areas, teachers included. But we've learned that we're pretty good at recruiting. Our problem is retaining. And so we're working. You'll see if you come to some of the critical conversations, you'll see that HR will be doing a retention task force. So we can do a better job at retaining. Last year we did a better job. We had a retention rate of about 97% last year. We got a little under 100 vacancies this year, starting this year, where last year we started with about, I would say about 400 to 500 vacancies. So we're doing better, but we got to make sure we retain good quality people. And so we're working to ensure that we do that. Again, recruitment is not much of an issue. Development is not much of an issue. Let me tell you why sometimes we lose folk. Because other districts recruit our folk because they know they've been trained well. They have good experiences and they've been trained very well. Do you know if you can teach in some environments, you can teach in all environments? And when I say some, I mean Clayton being one of them. See, a teacher from Clayton will go to any school system and teach well. A teacher from some other places can't necessarily come to Clayton and do it very well. So I want to encourage, and I don't say that because I want you all to get experience and leave. I say that to say this, you all don't realize that, and I look at the data statewide, even our elementary data, Dr. Lee was at a state meeting and they highlighted Clayton County's growth. Our growth at the elementary level, and I know you all grades 3 through 5, our elementary schools grew better than 83% of all elementary schools, comparable elementary schools around the state. So we grow our kids. We should clap. We grow our kids. What does that mean? What does that mean? That we've got some effective teachers. And so sometimes people want to compare Clayton to other communities. Well, you can't compare this community to that community. You really can't. There are too many different variables, and you got to know your story, don't you? That's kind of like, you got two folk and two houses next to each other, and you don't know what goes on in each house. You can't compare what goes on in house A with house B because they could be two different parents from two different worlds and two different sets of situations. And so, but we are doing pretty good. We've got room to grow, clearly. We've got a lot of room to grow. But I believe you'll see today that we're going in the right direction. And, of course, our strategic improvement plan, I will not go over this with you, but if you will go to the website, on the links on the left side of the web page, there's a link for Advanced Ed Strategic Plan. If you hit that link, and then it will take you to one other link, hit that, it takes you straight to the strategic plan. You can see the goals, you can see the performance objectives, and you can also go to the scoreboard and see the targets over the next 5 years. All of that information is out there. You can see the action plans as well. So I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Simpson. He's our Deputy Superintendent for School Leadership. Let's give him a hand as he can.
Good afternoon. How y'all doing? I'm going to kind of take it a little bit further than I did on a couple of days ago when we were here. So, I'm often reminded through Dr. Lee of a number of things. Some right, most wrong. So we were having a conversation one day, and we were talking about reading and writing, and there was a debate on what was important, what was the most important. And I started to share this experience that I had as a fourth grader in Miss Banks's class, social studies, and how I remember, if you can recall that time, if you were a little bit older like me, when teachers asked the students to read aloud. And to me, it was more important that I enunciate the words correctly than understanding or comprehending what I read, because sitting to my right was a girl named Tracy. Tracy Miles, to be specific. And I liked Tracy Miles. Well, back then, girls particularly didn't like boys who couldn't read. So it was important for me to make sure I impressed Tracy Miles. That's what I'm saying. So I made sure that I enunciated the words correctly. That was my focus, and I was good at it. Well, I shared this experience with Dr. Lee, and she said, Dr. Simpson, that was not reading. I said, well, what was it then? She said, that was word calling. She said I was just calling out words. So I found out a couple of months ago that I couldn't read in the 4th grade. I was just calling out words. So you're going to hear from Dr. Beasley about impact. And I'll share with you just a few minutes, as I go on, how it impacted me, how that impacted me. Fast forward even through high school, you know, because I didn't grow, learn, develop that skill, that discipline for reading, I wasn't an avid reader. I didn't enjoy reading, and so I didn't read at all. I only read because I had to. Well, it impacted me with my SAT scores. Thusly, the basic skills or placement exam that I had to take when I got to West Georgia, which then landed me in learning support, reading. And you know, you had to test out of it. So this is the time when the University of West Georgia is on the court system, so I took the reading the first quarter. At the end of the semester or quarter, you have to take an exam and test out, make a 67 to be exact. And I made a 66, so I had to take it again the next quarter. I took it the second quarter, my freshman year, I made a 65. I had to take it the third quarter. The third quarter, I made a 66 again, and because I made a 66 twice, they allowed me to take it again the next day. I made a 65. And so going into my second year, which really wasn't my sophomore year because I didn't have enough credits to be a sophomore, I had to take learning support again and reading. So what I'm saying to you, it took me 4 quarters to exit out of that class. Talking about impact. All the way back to calling out words. Tracy Miles. You see where I'm going? So when we talk about a sense of urgency, and I mean, that's just my personal story. The biggest challenge for me when I left high school going to college was the reading. And I said yesterday, a couple of days ago, when I finally took a credited class, a class that I earned credit for, it was from the president of West Georgia's Political Science 101. The homework assignment after 50-minute lecture was read chapter 1 for homework. The first thing I did was look to see how many pages were in chapter 1. It was 50 pages. Folks, I had never read 50 pages in one night or one day. I had never read 40 pages. I had never read 30 pages. Not even 20. So I struggled all the way through college. All the way through college because I had to read over and over again. So something I heard yesterday, last evening, Dr. Beasley and I, we were at this panel discussion on poverty downtown. And I heard someone say, learn to read so you can read to learn. And I was like, wow. I wish I had heard that when I was in the 4th grade. I don't take anything away from Ms. Banks. That was years and years ago. What we know now, it's probably not what we knew then. What I can remember most about Ms. Banks was the fact that I had to stand in the back of her class holding dictionaries up in both hands and with one leg in the air. I saw Ms. Banks in the Piccadilly about 2 years ago. She now has dementia, but I still remember her because she did have an impact in my life. But the reading part then may not have been what it is now. But because of what we know, you know, they say you know better, you can do better. That's where we are. So we know better now. We know better. And it is, folks, it's a sense of urgency. That's personal. So it's personal for me. And then I'll leave you with this. So my son, who's a senior in high school, can read 50 or 100 pages in a day. I'm totally blown away by that. I stress that obviously because of my experience. I said to him when he was able to do that in the 9th and 10th grade, I was like, dude, you're ready for college. I said, because that's typically the biggest learning curve that you will experience from high school to college is the depth of reading. So we can start our children, first just get them to understand why. The why. Get them to understand the importance of it and what it can do for them. So I say the authentic literacy. This is from Mike Smoker. Reading, writing, and speaking. If they can master those 3 things, if they can just master those 3 things, it can change their lives forever. So that's the sense of urgency. So you hear later in Dr. Beasley talking about the impact that you have, or that you will have on a child. And years later, I hope they're not able to tell the story that I have, because while I did, wiggle my way through, it's been a challenge. It's truly been a challenge. So that's my spirit. All right.
Thank you so much, Dr. Beasley and Dr. Simpson, for sharing your personal struggle and as well as success. So now he's gone on and he's an author. So obviously he is a reader now. But the conversation, as we all know, is very important. And how many of you educators, you have students who have come to you and they're below level in their reading? Now the beauty is that there's still high potential and high capacity. But what we're going to talk about, and Vic is going to expound on even further, the complexity of learning to read, but even also with our instructional approaches, what are the proven practices that contribute to closing those gaps? Because ultimately we want our students to be actively engaged in the learning so that they become thinkers. The world needs thinkers, right? Problem solvers, critical thinkers, creatives. And so when we have those barriers of reading, sometimes our students don't feel invited into the learning and they choose to opt out. But we don't want them to opt out. So I'm going to share with you data, but I would first like to just share with you research findings that you're probably already familiar with. But the first one just speaks to that third graders who are not reading at grade level are among the most vulnerable to drop out. And even though we continue to study, when they're dropping out in high school, they were 88% for struggling readers. And how many of you are third grade teachers? Yeah. So the goal is, and Dr. Simpson mentioned this, they should be learning the code in that system early so that by the time they get to third grade, they are able to read to learn. When they do not become readers by the time they leave third grade, they have a 1 in 8 chance of ever learning. And guess what? The text gets harder, the tasks get more complex, what we're asking kids to do have greater demand. And then look at the final one. By 4 years old, you can start to see the language gap. The language gap, the vocabulary. Sometimes students are exposed prior to 4 to parents who speak in lofty sentences and great vocabulary. They're read to every night, 1,000 books before kindergarten. But then you have other students who are not, but we're specialists. And so if I'm a doctor, I have signed up to be a specialist, correct? And so as educators, we're specialists, and it's not easy, but that's why we have to use the proven practices to impact this. And so the two terms that I want to emphasize is readiness and automaticity. Readiness, meaning no matter what text or task is put before you, our students have done it so much, they practice it, that they have a level of readiness, so that they're not opting out. The automaticity is that, especially with reading, we want our students to be word callers so that they can comprehend. So that's why the fluency is so important. And that's with anything we do. If you're fluent with the fundamentals, now you can build on it and really get deeper into the learning. So we want our students to be ready and we want them to be automatic. And so when we look at what students are required to do at the onset of grade 3, we need them reading. They have to be readers. And when we look at the vocabulary demands that our students have to conquer and know, that's why we want students speaking consistently every day using that academic discourse and then writing. So by school year 2023, and you all probably already know this, that in our strategic plan, we've outlined some performance objectives. And on the document that you had, the very first one, we want our students by 2023 at least 80% at proficient or distinguished. By school year 2023, 5 years. So the principals have received incremental goals so that they can assess if they're on track. But that just means, as a teacher, you think about the goal of 80% or higher by 2023. How am I progress monitoring student learning along the way? Because in order for the school to be at 80%, each classroom really needs to be at 80% or higher too. So our goal is 80%, but our current reality, and we shared this last night at the teacher advisory, is that we have on average about 25% of students. So out of every 4, 1 is ready to conquer that grade level content. But we give grade level to everyone. Everyone should have access to grade level. But we have to scaffold and support our students who are not there. So at your school, these figures, they have names. They have data. You know their data. You've looked at it. You've analyzed it. So that's the current reality. So let's look at the Georgia Milestones data for elementary, middle, and high school. This slide allows you to answer 2 questions. How have our students performed the last 4 years? And how do we compare with MRESA, which are our other metro area districts, Cobb, Gwinnett, Fulton, APS, Marietta City, and such on. And then how do they compare to Georgia? And so based on comparison of school year 16 and 17, when you look at the percent of students at proficient plus distinguished, we demonstrated growth in grades 3, 4, and 5 in the area of language arts. A slight dip in 6 and 7 and consistency in grade 8. But if you look at those totals, you again probably see that 1 and 4 is passing. And then you also notice the gap with the Metro Risa in Georgia. And so we want to exceed the performance of our neighbors as well as the state. And in math, you notice the growth in grades 3, 4, and grade 7. Grade 3 is critical because when you look at the longitudinal of your tracking cohorts, you start seeing that if students have it by 3rd grade, they have foundational knowledge and skills for the subsequent grade levels. And so in our schools, it has to be a collaborative effort. You can't plan alone. You just cannot. And so when I mentioned earlier that we're having this conversation with multiple stakeholders, we need that circle of support, that wraparound support around the district, but also around each student. So when you're planning, you have to know who's my resource in the school that I can call on based on issue. It may be an instructional issue, it may be attendance, it may be behavior, it may be an emotional issue, but we have staff members who are the experts in that area. So your role is to, how can I remove the barrier to learning, no matter what the issue is? And then I would like to share science and social studies. Science, we show gains in grade 8, just a slight decline in grade 5. And then for social studies, we show growth in both grade 5 and grade 8. It is critical, and I was in a class today, 2nd grade, they were teaching science at Fountain Elementary. And the content, the life cycle, I was thinking they're going to reference this in middle school, and they're going to re-reference this in high school. So imagine if we were to skip teaching science. The background and the vocabulary. And even when our everyday conversation, I just thought about, we always reference something scientific. Even when we're talking about an organization, we may say, you're the nucleus, or this is a body. You know, we're always using scientific terminology to show analogies. So it is critical, you all, that our students are exposed to science, deeply science and social studies, every day, because all domains matter. And then for high school, we show growth or sustain in 6 areas, 6 out of the 8 tested areas. So grade 9, literature, geometry, physical science, and economics. We demonstrated growth. And again, when you think about the average is still at high school, about a quarter to a third of kids demonstrating proficiency. So it does, the foundation is critical, but again, we're meeting with 6 through 12 after this conversation to talk about the secondary role. So I just wanted to expose you beyond elementary so you can see how the kids are performing when they leave you. And at the end of the year, you can do comparison with your Georgia Milestones. Look at the scale score, and then how did they fare at the end of the year as another way to look at your impact. Now look at the reading data. This is based on Lexile measurements on the Georgia Milestones. So from grade 3 up to high school, we have a little over half of our students reading at or above grade level. So essentially that means you can give these students a grade level text and they can understand it with at least 75% accuracy. Do you notice a gap between reading levels and performance levels? Do we have more students reading on level? It may not feel like it sometimes, right? Because they may not be as engaged. But based on the measurement, we have quite a few students reading on level. We have a ways to go. We want 95% in 5 years. 95% having that critical life skill. And so this also tells us, because we have more kids reading on level than performing at proficiency, there's some disconnect with the mastery of the standards and the rigor. So the academically challenging tasks that we're requiring our students to do regularly. And this is the writing data. And you'll receive this PowerPoint as well as everything else we reference. And this just justifies the need that our kids need to be reading and writing across the board every day. This is an image of our current reality. We have kids in the classroom on different levels, but they all have the same expectations. And so the rigor and relevance framework, this is not a program, it's really not an initiative. It's a way to help us think about how we create tasks, learning experiences, and also the type of questions we pose to students and get students questioning. How many of you had the initial training on the framework? Okay, great. So I want to expound upon it. But where do we want our kids to be? Quad D. Because Quad D is what? Real life.
Real life connections, critical thinking.
Real life connections, critical thinking, being in an unpredictable situation and knowing what to do because you're a thinker. So thank you all. And at this time I want to call Big Betford up to talk about what is reading. What does it mean to be a reader? She has some interesting things to share.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. So the first question I wanted to look at is actually, what does it actually mean to be a reader? And Dr. Lee's already talked some about that as well as Dr. Simpson, but a reader is someone who discovers a passion for reading with every book they pick up. This does not mean that every book must be liked. Instead, it means that every book reveals something about the process of reading, or more spectacularly, the reader, him or herself. So in addition to teaching them how to read, it's developing a love of reading for them. That's becoming the reader, to move beyond the word calling and to develop that joy of reading and that love of reading. So then the question becomes, okay, if we know what a reader is, then how do we develop that reader? What does it take for us to develop readers? Well, first we need to take a look at our data, and this is our end-of-year DIBELS data from last year. So this is 17-18 end-of-year data, and I'm sure most of you have seen this report. This is the effectiveness report, and what this report does is it shows us how well we are doing at moving students out of one instructional category and into another. It also shows us how well we are maintaining those students who come to us already at benchmark or above benchmark. So just a couple of things I want to point out here. If you look on the far right in the blue column, these are your students who came in at the beginning of the year above benchmark. Okay? In all honesty, these bars should remain completely blue at the end of the year. It should be 100% of those students who began above benchmark at the beginning should remain that way at the end. Okay? What we want to see with our benchmark and our below benchmark is the growth. We want to see the yellow diminish and the green and the blue become more prominent as we get to the end of the year. That means we are moving those students out of that instructional category up into another one. But what I really want to focus on is our well below benchmark students. What you will see here is a couple of things. One, kindergarten teachers as a whole in the district are doing a phenomenal job of getting students ready by the end of the year. What's happening in first, second, and third is that we are not moving these students that are well below benchmark. They're coming to us well below benchmark, and they're remaining well below benchmark. So we have to really dig in and work to make concerted efforts to move these students up to below benchmark, up to benchmark, up to above benchmark. And so again, our focus is to be able to move students. So how do we do that? Well, first is understanding our brain and how we read. Okay? When we are born with the innate ability to speak for oral language. All it takes when a child is born is to be around someone who talks for them to learn how to talk. Those of you that have your own children and you've watched it from the time they were born, they start babbling and making noises, and the older they get, the more they hear conversation, the more they're able to speak. It's natural. Our brains are naturally wired to do that. Just all we need is exposure to someone else talking. At the same time, our brain is also, we're naturally wired to see the visual aspect of it. Okay, we're able to naturally see shapes and objects and places. Again, if you look at really small children, you begin to see them develop that. They immediately start beginning to recognize, oh, that's Walmart, that's McDonald's, that's so-and-so, that's so-and-so. Again, it's not something that we have to necessarily teach them. We may teach them this is a square, but they know that it's a shape of some sort. Okay? But what our brain is not wired for is to learn how to read. We're not born knowing how to read. So what that means is we have to be explicitly, systematically taught how to read. It's just like when you build a house or a building, when it gets to the point that you need to have electricity running through your building, you have to have an electrician come in and put the wiring in. Because without the wiring, will you have power? No, it's the wires that get you the power. So with our brains, if we as the teacher or the electrician, if we're not coming in and wiring our students' brains to learn how to read, they're not going to get it by, I can sit and read to my children. And that's great and that's wonderful, and those are things that we should do when we're developing other skills, but we're not teaching them how to read if all they're doing is listening to us read. They're not going to learn that way. So it has to be explicit and systematic teaching to get them to learn to read so that we can make that transition in 3 through 5 to reading to learn. So what research tells us is this very simple view of reading, okay? In order to be a reader, you basically have to have two things. And this diagram answers the question, when I have a text in front of me, how do I get meaning from it? Well, the first thing I have to be able to do is what? Decode. I have to be able to decode the text. I have to be able to call the words. Well, that's not enough. So the second part of my equation is, now that I can call the words, now I have to understand the words that I'm calling. So if I have both pieces of the equation, then I'm able to read to gain meaning. So both are equally important. One is not necessarily more important than the other, but the comprehension of language is going to come once I have that decoding ability down. So even if we know the language something is written in, okay, if we're not familiar with the symbols and what the symbols mean, we could say, oh, that's written in Chinese. But if I don't know what Chinese symbols are, if I don't know what each one stands for, then I can't decode the Chinese language. So I want you to take just a minute, and I want you to see if you can decode this sentence, the sample sentence that's up here. I won't make you struggle too long. Anybody have any ideas? Just the first word? Maybe the first letter of the first word? Would you like me to give you the answer? The answer is kit, ran, and hid. Now, what I did not tell you about this particular language that's up here is that, what do you notice at the very beginning of this sentence? A period. So what does that tell you about this language? They read from right to left. And how do we read? From left to right. So what was the first thing you automatically tried to start doing when you tried to decode this sentence? Start from left to right, because that's what you know with the English language. So what I didn't tell you was that this language, you need to start on the right-hand side and go from right to left. That's a very basic, fundamental concept of print, and that's what we're teaching students in kindergarten and first grade, is that's one of the first things they have to understand. We are reading from left to right, not from right to left. Otherwise, they'll just read any old way, okay? So, then what does all this mean when it comes to teaching reading, when it comes to students learning to read? Well, one, we have to understand it does take a child 2 to 3 years to learn to decode. So that's why it's critical that each grade level does their incremental piece. And that's why kindergarten and first grade, and I know you guys are 3 through 5 teachers, but it's critical that they're getting that piece in kindergarten and first grade, so that as second, third, fourth, and fifth grade teachers, you all can continue to do your incremental pieces. We also have to, and again, English is the toughest alphabetic language to learn there is, because our English language does not have one letter, one sound. We have 26 letters and we have 44 sounds. So it makes it very difficult, makes it harder for students to learn how to read English. But what we also have to understand is that, again, there are no shortcuts. You know, having them memorize every word by sight is only going to get them so far. Because what happens is you have a word like this that pops up in something you're reading. Who can read that word for me? Not to put anybody on the spot, but Brobdingnag. What about the second one? Glove, dove, drip. How do you know that? How are you able to decode those 2 words? Chunking it, the sounds. Because you're familiar with things like VR and VR, but if all a child has done is just memorize some words, when it comes to this, then they have no strategy for attacking these unknown words that they run into. So our brains are muscles. So what we have to do is give students practice. Okay, it's just like with anything. The expert pianist. Okay, when I was younger, I took piano lessons. I thought that sitting next to my piano teacher, I'd learn how to play the piano better. No, I had to actually practice what she was teaching me. It wasn't enough for me to just listen to her and watch her. I had to actually physically do the practice. People who play any kind of sport, they don't become expert by just watching someone else play. They continue to play, they continue to practice. So we have to give students the practice to continue to read over and over and over. And so that brings me to this, and I know it's kind of hard to see in the back, but how many of you, as part of your staple for homework over the years, have told kids, read 20 minutes a night? Okay, I used to do it too. But have you ever stopped to think about why you asked them to read 20 minutes a night? It is exposure. That's a large part of it, because if you look at this, student A who reads 20 minutes a night, 5 days a week, versus student B who reads, let's say, maybe 4 or 5 minutes a night, if they continue those habits all the way through 6th grade, all the way to the end of 6th grade, then student A will have read the equivalent of 60 days, as opposed to student B who would only have read for 12 days. So reading 20 minutes a night, there is a reason, there is a purpose, and it is to, again, help develop that love of reading, but it's that wide reading. It's that exposure to the content. It's the exposure to the vocabulary. It's the exposure to the experiences. Because even if you don't have the physical experience, you can experience things through the books. So then the questions become with student A and student B, which child is going to read better? A. Which child will know more? Which child is going to write better? Which child is going to have a better vocabulary? And ultimately, which child is going to be more successful in life? And it's the one who reads more. So that is something that you can share with parents. When parents say, well, why do they have to read 20 minutes a night? This is why they have to read 20 minutes a night. So schools that deliver the strongest results start early. There's a focus in kindergarten and first grade, making sure that students are getting those decoding pieces as they go along, so that by the time they get to you all, they're in a place where you can pick up with your grade level content and continue to move them forward. Surround kids with books. Again, it's surrounding them with books, helping them develop that love of reading. They're reading 20 minutes a night. They're reading something they enjoy. They're reading something that's on their level. They're broadening the vocabulary. They're getting the content in that they need, all of that. And then measuring student progress. We have to constantly measure progress to see whether or not what we're doing is working. Okay? And I'll turn it back over to Dr. Lee.
Okay. How many of you think this is interesting, getting some good insight, or is even affirming what you may have known entering? I would like to share with the statement about surrounding kids with books. So today we met with transportation. Mr. Walker, he's our director, and he is in support and knows that we all have ownership in this process. But guess what they're supporting us with putting on the bus? Books. And so we measured the seats, we designed a holder, and so starting next week, we're going to start with just a few buses. They will have books on the bus with just 3 expectations: that they select a book quickly, read it during the journey, and then put it back when they finish. And so that's just another effort of how we all are in ownership of this. Yep. So thank you, Mr. Walker, if you see him. So at this time, I'm just going to share with you, or just re-emphasize a few of the high-impact practices, and then Dr. Beasley is going to come and give you the formula for how you can calculate your impact. And so, how many of you heard of John Hattie's Visible Learning? Read the book? There's basically, essentially, he and researchers have studied over 500 million students across the world. And based on their studies and meta-analyses, they have determined a list of practices, several practices, that tend to yield greater gains with student learning. And so, after Dr. Beasley shares with you how to calculate, you'll be able to determine if what you're doing regularly is making a difference on student growth. And so the 3 high-impact practices that we've chosen across our academic program, and you probably know them: academic discourse, higher order questioning, and that thoughtful work of evidence-based writing. Those practices have been proven to yield more than 1 year of growth among our students, and just students in general. And so I just want to speak to you briefly, and you probably can just reflect on your lesson today and how much discussion students were engaged in. Were they required to ask you questions, to explore phenomena, or to pose an inquiry-based question, or to get clarity using questions? And then, did they write? So raise your hand if your students wrote today. See, we need to get some more colleagues in here. So we're talking to the choir. So you have to spread this message, okay? So with the first one, evidence-based writing. Is that a skill that we need in real life? Yes. We have to all have a discerning spirit or skill to know how to read something and gather meaning, but then more importantly, be able to express ourselves in writing. So with evidence-based writing, we've decided we're looking for 3 main things. What are we looking for in an evidence-based response? Claim. So a clearly stated stance or position or claim. After claim, what do we need to make or have? the supporting evidence that's relevant, exactly, excellent. And then once I supply the claim, I have the evidence, what do I need to do? I gotta reason, I gotta justify, I gotta explain. And that's the part that requires that thinking even more deeply. So excellent, you all. So the evidence-based writing we want to occur, and the answers are up here, but I know you weren't looking. Okay, so the next one is questioning. All students can fully explain and justify their thinking when responding to questions that demonstrate different levels of thinking. So we know we use questions to pique interest, to build anticipation, but also to have our students critically think about content. But we want to start training our students, if you're not already doing it, on how they should question each other, their peers, pose questions to you, just to make them interested, because if they're questioning, they're engaged. That's one indicator. And if they're questioning, they're learning. You know, so we want our students, not only are we posing those higher order questions, but we want them to know how to question, because that is a life skill. And if you don't ask the right questions, you can make big mistakes. And so we want to definitely ensure that we're examining our questions. The academic discussion. How many of you have students who naturally know how to converse with their peers and with the utmost collegiality among peers? Right, we're laughing. But that is an important life skill, right? When will they learn it? So if they're not learning it at home, okay, then their time with us is when they learn the rules of engagement. So the academic discussion is not just about building, it is critical that we're building the language of the discipline and they're getting comfortable with that rich vocabulary. But also, this is when they build those interpersonal skills, when they know how to expound upon what my peer just said. So we don't want them saying things like, let me piggyback, but I would like to expound upon, or I would like to validate, or I would like to have something in opposition. So we want them comfortable using that language during academic discussions. And so we should hear the language of the standards, but we also should have our students learning how to collaborate with each other. So really, you all, those are the 3 high-impact practices. Now, there are more. There are copious others. But just in general, every day, we want our students engaged in discussions, even if it's just peer-to-peer, you know, with you as a teacher or with a smaller group. We want them asking questions, or even you posing those higher order questioning. They may be quiet initially, but eventually they'll rise to the occasion. And then the close reading or close observation with the evidence-based writing. Okay, so now this time I'm going to call up Dr. Beasley, our mathematician, who's also superintendent, and he's going to take us through.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. How many have ever wondered how to measure your impact on your students? Well, if you've been a part of the visible learning conversations, John Hattie, as Dr. Lee mentioned, Dr. Hattie did not develop the terminology or the calculation of effect size, but he's probably one that has allowed it to be, I guess, part of the educational conversation more than many. And so what I'd like to do is show you how you could basically figure out, okay, how did I do relative to this strategy? Did I have a positive impact? Did I have a negative impact? Was it a pretty large positive impact, a pretty moderate positive impact, or was it a low impact? And so what I want you to see, and I will not be showing you the formula per se, but we will use a spreadsheet that Dr. Lee and the team will send this out to you so you can use it. There are a few things you've got to know. Effect size basically gives you a measure for determining the impact you had. In our educational environment, we have come to some type of agreement on impact. If you would look here, Dr. Lee, if you could make the first 2 or 3 rows pretty large for us, okay? Effect size ends up being a number somewhere between 0 and 1, inclusive of 0 and 1, okay? It can be higher than 1 as well. But when you see effect size, I want you to think about growth. How much growth a student has made relative to your impact, your strategy, your whatever you're doing. If you notice in the blue, according to Cohen, an effect size of 0.2 is considered rather small. It's a positive effect, but it's rather small. And an effect size of 0.5 is what we call a medium effect size. And clearly, 0.8 is considered a large effect size. In Hattie's research, if you will just go to the right there, he's consistent that a 0.2 effect size is small, but we've come to an agreement that if you have a 0.4 effect size, that's the minimum we'd like to see educators achieve, a 0.4 effect size. That's a medium effect size, but it's equivalent to about 1 year's worth of growth. 0.4, so if you can remember that, 0.4. And clearly anything above 0.4 is just more icing on the cake. More icing on the cake. And so if you notice right below there, where we have approximate effect sizes, 0.15 is about 0 months worth of growth for a 12-month period. 0.2 is about 9 months worth of growth for a 12-month period. 0.4 is about a year's worth of growth for a 12-month period. And so that's why Hattie and others are saying if we can get through our actions about a 0.4 effect, then we should be able to see about a year's worth of growth. And clearly, an effect of 1 is 2 to 3 years worth of growth. I'm going to show you an example today that reveals that depending on our impact, you can get, or our strategy and our efficacy, you can get a pretty high effect size. So what I did here, I used a spreadsheet and I just pulled some of our data. And so Dr. Lee's going to go down to the data. The first thing I did for kindergarten, can everybody see the kindergarten? What I decided to use, I used the Dibbles data. Two things you got to have when you determine effect size. You got to have a pre and a post. How many of you pre-assess your students before a unit? Then you made a post assessment. So as long as you have a pre and a post, then you can calculate your effect, okay? It has to be the same pre and it has to be the same what? Okay, the pre and post has to be the same, okay? So what I did, I decided to take Vic's Dibbles data for kindergarten. I took the percent of kids who were in the blue and green categories at the beginning of the year, and then I decided to plug in for the post data the percent of kids who were in the blue and green categories at the end of the year. So that was the pre and post data that I was using. I did that for kindergarten. Now Vic's diagram showed us that the kindergarten teachers are doing pretty good. Did you all see how they reduced the number of kids who were in the red category? Well, if you look, and I did this for every school, so basically my classroom is the set of schools. Imagine all the elementary schools each school being a student of mine, okay? So I did that. I put all the data in for the schools, kindergarten data for the schools. And if you use a spreadsheet, all you got to do is put the name there on the name and then put your data in. It will calculate it automatically. I did that for kindergarten. And then right above the blue row with the descriptions, you can see the effect. So it takes your mean average for your pre and your post. It calculates the difference for you. It calculates the standard deviation for your mean and your post. It calculates your average standard deviation, and then it calculates your effect size. So look at the kindergarten effect size, 2.4. That is consistent with what Vic showed us, that our kindergarten teachers are doing pretty good, aren't they? They are growing kids more than a year's worth within the time that they have the students. And that's pretty phenomenal. So let's give our kindergarten teachers a hand. Now, I wish I had done first grade, but I decided not to because of my time. So I went to second grade. So let's see, I did the same thing for second grade. I have to have what for each school? Pre and what? And let me say this, you should have a minimum of about 20 students. Okay, that's what they're suggesting. You have a minimum of 20 students. I knew we had more than 20 elementary schools, so I felt like we were okay. So again, I did pre at the beginning of the year, post Dibbles, blue and green at the end of the year, okay? And Look at the effect. You see the average mean for pre and post? You see the difference? You see the average standard deviation, then the average, and then look at the effect size. And it was consistent with the data. Basically, it showed that we started at the beginning of the year with more kids on or above, I guess, strategic, right? We ended the year with fewer than we started. So, what happened? Basically, the instruction overall for, what grade is this? Overall instruction for second grade teachers had a negative what? Impact on students. The reason I like us to have this conversation, I'm glad we're having it, is because we as the professionals, we've got to look at the impact that our actions are having on our what? Our students. And the reason I like the calculation is because it takes it out of the personal. It gives you a little quantity for you to figure out, okay, did I have a good impact? And that's why I'm showing you this, because if you're doing pre and post, as many of you are, I want you to start using this. Try to use it when you do a pre and a post and see what impact you're having. Remember, the goal is to have 0.4 as your effect. Okay? Now, even though you're doing pre and post for a unit, it still gives you some quantity in which you're measuring yourself. Does that make sense? And the goal is to try to strive through your strategies, whatever actions you're taking, from pre to post to create an effect of 0.4 or higher. Does that make sense? So all of us should get in the habit of looking at our effect. And so what I decided to do, since you all are a third grade and higher, Dr. Lee, go along, if you will. I sent you another spreadsheet. You probably didn't get that one yet. Can you pull it up? What I decided to do, I decided to take third grade last year, third grade in 2017, and look at fourth grade in 2018, right? Wouldn't that be the same cohort? So I wanted to see, as a school system, did we have a positive effect? And what effect did we have when kids went from third grade, they finished third grade at a certain district-wide, every school finished at a certain percent of kids who were proficient and higher, and then for fourth grade, after a year, we had those kids were a certain percent were proficient or higher. I wanted to see what effect did we have. You can't probably open it up, can you?
Well, it says you have this one today.
Yeah.
It's open, this is it.
Oh, okay. Is
It
it?
doesn't have K in second.
Oh, okay.
You want to?
That's okay. I got it right here.
Okay.
I may have just, you know, I hope I did not do all of that calculation, didn't I? My effect. I want you to see, though, go to that CIA folder. I hope I saved it, Dr. Lee. If I didn't, shame on me. CIA curriculum. No, I didn't say it. Sad. But let me tell you and I'll send it to you. I said it in my conference room, and I saved it, and I thought I attached it, but I didn't. Let me tell you what I calculated. Once I took the third grade from 2017 and the fourth grade for 2018, guess what the effect size was? Anyone want to guess? I just took the data from every school from 2017 third grade and fourth grade reading. Point, you think it was 0.5? Anybody else? 0.4? Anybody else? 0.7? It was 0. As a matter of fact, when I looked at the data, it would have been negative, but we didn't have as many schools to regress. So the cohort, basically, we had no effect on the third graders from spring of 2017. Well, we had an effect when I say It was just, in other words, we didn't get more kids from 3rd to 4th grade proficient or higher. Does that make sense? And the goal is to get more kids. Let's say we've got 50% in 3rd grade, at the end of 3rd grade proficient, right? The goal is to get more than 50% in 4th grade proficient or what? Or higher, after a year's worth of instruction. And so that, it was just a tool. You got to know how to interpret it, but it gives you just a quantity that you can use to determine, okay, am I having a positive effect on my students? And you can use it, let's say you decide to use one of the high impact strategies that Dr. Lee has shared as you teach a particular content unit. You pre-assess the students, you're going to use this strategy consistently in order to teach this unit, and then you want to post-assess your students. Then that's a great measure to see how did you do with that, teaching that particular strategy. Clearly there are many other variables that impact instructional outcomes, but it's a quick, dirty way of you determining your impact from pre to post. And so I just want to encourage you to use that. So why do we want to have these conversations? As Dr. Lee said earlier, you can't do this alone. And one reason I think it's helpful to even see as we calculate the effect size, as a group of schools, we've got to have a better impact on our students. Does that make sense? On your grade level, you want to work collaboratively so you can have a positive impact on every individual student, but on the grade level as a what? As a whole. You want to work vertically because you want students, if they ended 3rd grade at one level and started 4th grade at that level, you want to ensure that you add value to them so they can end 4th grade in a better place. Those are the type conversations that we've got to have as we move our data forward. Dr. Lee shared the targets where we like to go according to the strategic plan. Those are very aggressive targets. If we get close to them, we'll be celebrating. You got to shoot high. Shoot for 100 and you may land where? At 80. Shoot for 80, you may land at 60, right? That's okay. As long as we're moving in the right direction. Targets just help us. But it also allows us some context as to measure our impact. How are we moving? So I want you to start thinking about your impact, thinking about your strategies. There are, when I looked at the data, and I did some individual calculations, even on the spreadsheet that we'll share, there are some schools, when you look at their data, they had a larger impact than other schools. Those are the type of conversations we got to have. Why does one school with the same demographics, why can they move their school 20 points higher at the end of 1 year? The same, another school, demographic no differently, but that school drops 20 points. It's not the students, is it? Those are the tough conversations we gotta have. When we as adults and professionals, I like to think about how many of you ever watch House, when the show with the House MD, where they have a situation, somebody's sick with some disease or whatever they don't know anything about. They bring the whole team together and they figure it out. Have you ever seen the process? They ask real tough questions, don't they? They may experiment with some things, even though House would, try some unorthodox solutions. But they may experiment a little bit. He gets frustrated at times, doesn't he? The team got frustrated. They thought it was one thing, and they thought one solution would work, and it didn't quite work, and they had to go back. But at the end of the show, normally, they figured it out, right? It wouldn't be a good show if they didn't figure it out. All I would say to us is you got to figure it out. Our work is very complex. There are many variables, but you can't figure it out by yourself. You got to work in teams. That grade level has got to get together. then those grade levels have got to get together. 3rd and 4th grade teachers have got to get together, figure it out. 4th and 5th grade teachers got to get together and do what? Figure it out. It's tough. It's not easy. You won't ever hear me tell you it's easy. But the goal is when we get together to try to figure it out, we increase the impact that we have on those outcomes. And so that's what the purpose of these conversations. Dr. Lee has highlighted here the effect sizes, the top effect sizes, the strategies that have the biggest impact if consistently used, right?
And Dr. Beasley, last night we had a question from one of the participants regarding the response to intervention or the multi-tier system of support. And so even when you're thinking of how you responding to students' instructional needs, we don't want those strategies to be randomly selected or based on, hunches. You can use starting here, but then also if you just go to the visible learning, you just Google visible learning, John Hattie, they're going to bring up multiple evidence-based practices. And so with your circle of support in your school, you all should be working collaboratively. Even though there may be one person representing RTI for the school in terms of monitoring and tracking, the teacher should not feel isolated. That's basically a discussion of what are we seeing with the students? Which strategies do we want to use? How are we going to monitor it collectively, then come together and have that discussion? It's tremendous work, you all. So again, we cannot do it alone. So you just need to know who are your support people in and outside of your school to assist with the process. But if we know we have a top 10 here, let's start here and then venture out from there, okay?
And so this, again, one of the purposes is to provide you tools to really think about your impact on instruction. Because you really want your students to grow when they're with you for 180 days, don't you? What we're noticing, and I'll close with this, what we notice, we got a few schools that their data looks pretty okay compared to data around the state. But when we drill down into their data, over the years, most of their kids come to them in kindergarten starting out in the blue and green category. But then, by the time they get to 3rd grade, their proficiency rates are no better than many other schools. So what happened? You mean the kids started out kindergarten already where they needed to be, right? Or better than where most students start out in kindergarten. But those kids still are not, by the time they take that 3rd grade, that first GMAS in 3rd grade, they're still not performing at the proficient and distinguished levels at the level that you would think the kids started out in 3rd grade. See, to me, that goes back to an impact conversation, doesn't it? What's happening that the kids start out reading well, but by the time they get to 3rd grade, though they know how to read and they're reading well, they're not learning the content. There's got to be something about our strategies or standard or the way we're teaching or the way the standard is something that we got to figure out. And the only way you're going to do that is get around the table and have these very honest, collaborative conversations. Does that make sense, everybody? That's how we're looking at the data now, and we'll be working with our various schools and principals and others because we really don't want kids to regress from grade to grade, do we? We have to add value to wherever they are. They should, at a minimum, maintain where they are in August and end the year in a higher place. We realize there are other things going on in life. But as the teachers, the educators, the professionals, we've got to make sure that our actions are contributing to them increasing their outcomes and not causing regression where in the outcomes. Okay? Okay? Any questions? Your time to ask questions. And we'll send all these tools out, the PowerPoint and the spreadsheet. And feel free tomorrow. Feel free to use the spreadsheet, even if you just, pick a unit that you want to do it with. But you got to remember, you got to have a pre and a what? And a minimum of how many students? even though the spreadsheet is calculated for hundreds, I think up to 1,000 or so, you just use it for who you have it for. Very good. Has this been helpful? Good, good. Well, thank you all for coming, and hopefully, question? Yes, sir.
First of all, I want to say thank you for this opportunity because it's very beneficial. Ms. Bedford, she's reading my reading endorsed now, and even her presentation today, I learned something, so I'm excited to get that. But I would like to continue these conversations. I know that we said that we're going to continue these conversations. Something that I would like to propose and suggest is maybe to actually have some leadership come to our schools and maybe sit within our grade level chair meetings, or not the chair meetings, within our grade level meetings to have these conversations. Because me personally, I'm not afraid to speak in front of people or speak out. Hello. But I know that a lot of people that I work with who do have great ideas and suggestions can be a little intimidating to other people who may not be comfortable. So I think that's a situation or a suggestion that could help other teachers still have their voice be heard.
Very good. And Dr. Lee and I discussed that we would take this presentation to selectively pick some schools based on the data to go and have this conversation.
So you volunteer Anderson?
Like it's always wrong. Excellent.
Hey, Dr. Beasley, can you talk about how, what the impact is regarding class sizes and socioeconomic status as well?
Well, the research relative to class sizes, it can go either way. Even though it can be used as a political football, a good teacher is going to produce good outcomes whether that teacher has 20 students or 25 students. Now, there becomes a limit. A great kindergarten teacher, you can't have 50 kindergartners. That is impossible. So the class size data, if you look at Hattie's, I want to say it has a very low effect size. 0.20. It has a very low effect size. Now, relative to poverty, we know this. Poverty creates challenges relative to teaching and learning. And so what we've got to do is make sure we mitigate for poverty through higher levels of effectiveness. That's the key. Oftentimes what we see is the lowest income children or the more poverty children who are in poverty situations, their teachers are less effective, according to the research. But we also have data that would suggest when their teachers are effective, their teachers grow them more than a lot of folk whose children are not in poverty situations. So there's research that would suggest that when they are effective, they grow the kids more. But we do know poverty has a negative impact, or it challenges, if you will, the instructional environment. But a great teacher, an effective teacher, accommodates and overcomes that drag of poverty, along with some other resources, because sometimes you got to address some non-academic factors, as you all well know, social, emotional, and you understand. You got to address those factors as well. Parental involvement. But I would say to you, and relative to those factors that you can't control, because even sometimes parental involvement you can't control. What I've seen and observed through experience is the more you plan for instruction, the more you ensure you have good rituals and routines, the more that you are consistent. First, have high expectations. What I've learned, what I've seen is some people think that you lower expectations when it comes to children with poverty. Don't ever lower the expectations. You have higher expectations, and then you provide them the support that they need to meet those expectations, and they will meet it every time. How do we know that they can do it? Because if children in poverty couldn't do it, we wouldn't have almost 30% of our kids proficient now, would we? Think about it. We got almost 30% of our kids proficient across all subjects in the grade levels. So 30% can be proficient depending on how we modify, enhance, revise our strategy. We may can push that up to 50% being what? proficient. And we as the adults, so I would always tell people this when I was high school principal of 4 high schools. I would love to see every parent show up, but I told my staff if they never show up, it doesn't matter. As long as that parent makes sure that their child is in my school every day, when they come to your class every day, you make sure that you provide them the best instruction, because they will rise to the level of your expectations. Low level, not much to rise to. High level, much to rise to. But saying you have high expectations and organizing your classroom to reflect high expectations are 2 different things. 2 different things. Bell-to-bell instruction. My students knew when you walk into my class, I don't have time to play. They knew while I'm calling roll, get the objective or the learning task written down. Do your little warm-up, because as soon as I call roll, we are going at it. Does that make sense? But if you notice, and I've noticed, and you will too, if you visit a few folk classrooms, you walk in that classroom, 10 minutes have gone by, just wasted time. 10 minutes for 180 days adds up to be how much wasted time? Too much. It's all about high expectations. And so I emphasize rituals and routines, planning for instruction, and always overplan. You didn't have dead time in my classroom because I always had a math problem for you to solve. If you solved this one, I had another one for you. If you solved the 10 that I had planned for, I had another 10 planned for you. Always overplan. But you convey through that high expectations. And guess what, you all? They should be doing more of the work than you are. If you're doing all the talking, that's why you're tired at the end of the day. You got to let them do the talking. Let them. And if they like to talk, and you know how they like to talk. I would always tell them, I'm going to give you something to talk about. Solve this problem, then you present it to the class. And then I'm going to give the class something to talk about. While you're presenting to the class, I want them to tell you how you solved it correctly or incorrectly. And if it's incorrect, they got to tell you why it's incorrect. And they got to show evidence of why it's incorrect. And cite the proof, the theorem, or whatever. Give them something to talk about. But what were we doing? We were engaging students. We were providing them an opportunity. I'll close with this. I remember my first year teaching. I was just, I had a little degree in math, and I was just teaching up a storm. And I was in a school where we had chalkboards on 2 of the walls, so I had about 6 chalkboards. And one day I was just teaching and solving problems, and I was so happy and impressed with myself. And I looked at the students, they were looking at me. And I realized, you have a math degree. You know how to do this. They don't know how to do it. So why are you doing all the solving? After that day, I changed my whole classroom. I decided to put up the objective or the learning task. I told the students, I showed them where they could see examples of the problems. I told them how to put themselves in groups. I told them what I would do, facilitating, and I made them study every problem. And then after they study the problem, I need you to do a similar problem. Now this was high school, so I could do this. Do a similar problem. I said, if you get to a point in the problem that you can't figure it out, I even gave them, these are the resources you have to figure it out. I was the last person on the list. Don't come to me yet. You got a peer, you got a resource. I told them, well, here are the resources that you need to go to before you come to me. That revolutionized my entire classroom. My students started learning at higher levels. They were more engaged. They took ownership of the content, and guess what? I was able to actually teach all the curriculum. All the curriculum. And the students learned all the curriculum. So I would just say, long answer, but I think you get the point, that it really goes back to, and these kids I was in the middle of the hood. I hadn't even seen projects around here that looked like what I started teaching in. I hadn't seen that in Clayton County. But these kids learn at high levels. So much so that I taught them when I was a college instructor at the time. They didn't know this, but I taught them college statistics. All the college level statistics problems I would give to them. I didn't tell them they were college level, but They did them. You know why? Because I had high expectations. Of course they can do it. High expectations.
Yes. I agree 150% with what you said, having the high expectations. My concern is the social emotional support for these kids that are coming into school with post-traumatic stress disorder from whatever happened to them. And yes, we are doing bell-to-bell teaching, and I even struggle. I do the first 2 weeks of school trying to teach them social emotional stuff, but I feel that it's a lot of extra pressure, and especially you say, okay, be an effective teacher. Well, some teachers, they say, okay, be great, be effective. But I think there's something that's lacking in that support of teaching teachers how to use empathy, teaching teachers how to support the kids that with PTSD, because what I've noticed and observed is some other teachers may be suffering from the same thing, and they may be reactive, and they corner the kid, which escalates the situation. So I think what needs to be set in place is our training sessions that need to happen so that we can change this environment, number one, and number two, counselors. The thing is, I know it's all about the money and politics, but I don't know if it's ever been considered having counseling as a special in schools where there's a rotation it's mandated for every class, and that way it takes, not all the burden off of you, but it takes some of that extra pressure, and it'll allow the counselors to really hone in on those things. Because I know our counselor, yeah, she gets on the screen once a week and talks about it as a lesson, but I think it's more important if the counselor sits in with the room with the kids and they do physical activities, practicing, modeling, rehearsing. That's the most important thing. And I think with that, we're going to see more improvement. And teachers should sit in on those sessions too, just to see what the counselor does so that they can reinforce it in the classroom.
We totally agree with you, and that's why we've rolled out our new social emotional learning training. So we're training all the new teachers coming into the district. And over time, we'll get to all the teachers who are...
All the teachers that are, yeah.
Yeah, so we are working on that. And relative to our counseling, one of our priorities, we are pushing for more support at the state level for funding to address...
The
that's correct,
psychology.
Which would be more counseling. But I do believe that even with the way we do our counseling programs, there has to be a mindset change.
Yes, I agree.
As you just described, where counseling becomes a part of the rotation.
Correct.
And sometimes we've got to help adults change our mindset and how we do things, but we can't expect, for example, in our system prior to this year, counselors were doing all the master schedules. So we shifted that away from counselors so they could spend more time doing counseling. And so we're in the process of shifting so they can spend more time doing those type of activities, if you will, with children, because the need is there. And it's not just in Clayton, you all. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
And that's because of the society that we live in. So we have rolled out a training. It will take some time to get to everyone, clearly.
Right.
And then we'll have to maintain that training. But we are onboarding as we onboard the new teachers, we will be training one person on every campus who will then serve as that campus trainer to help us address these issues. And as we tighten up the budget and we get to a point where we have more resources, clearly SEL, social emotional learning, is an area that we're going to be directing some resources to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Those are all the questions, Dr. Beasley.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody for coming, and we'll get this information out to you by tomorrow.
Yes, we will.
All right.
Thank
Take
you all
care,
so
everybody.
much. Have a great evening.